and found out more about myself, and I'd confess it, so to speak, with another guy, and he'd talk to me,
Right.
you know, and I'd think to myself, you too? You know, you do that too? You think that way too? And it's a very, very powerful thing. Is you find out, you know, that spiritual uniqueness. We think there's nobody else in the world like us. Yes, there is. We're all the same way.
Well, and one of the beautiful things, again, one of the beautiful things about the rules is that, you know, Ignatius was just given a tremendous gift in just, Ignatius is a mystic. He's not often, you know, not necessarily always viewed that way because he's so geared towards action. But Ignatius is a mystic just as Teresa of Avila is a mystic, just as John of the Cross is a mystic. And he sees very deeply. He sees very deeply. And he sees very deeply and understands very deeply the human person and God. And so the rules are very, very applicable. They're so, I mean, don't get caught up with the language just yet. Just kind of let that float for a while. But because the rules really are very deeply understanding of the human experience, especially in its relationship to the experience of God. Yes?
When you just described a mystic, when you just said what he was, is that what a mystic is? How would you describe a mystic? Because I've never heard that term.
You've never heard the term mystic before?
Somebody was a mystic, no. I mean, I have, but I thought it was not something.
Well, I mean, just again, just sort of very briefly.
I think of card readers and things like that.
No. Yeah, no. Again, but again, that's our current culture. You know, mysticism is an experience of Christian prayer that is. This is not the best explanation at all, but just to kind of try and respond to it within this context. An experience of God that is somehow beyond words, beyond images, and where God just so bursts forth within the person, and that in an instant, without images, without words, suddenly that person understands huge amount of things that years and years of study would not have given that person. Thomas Aquinas, for example, spent his whole life as a theologian, you know, and writing. He gave us the Summa Theologica, one of the greatest works in the theological works in the history of the church, and it's an encyclopedia set. It's huge. Towards the end of his life, had a mystical experience where he really saw God. But again, not with the visual. It's a different kind of seeing. And his response to that was, after what he had experienced, everything I've written is straw compared to the beauty I experienced. So it's a rare gift, but it's a gift within the spiritual life of a Christian. Yes.
This is back to language. I read in a preface to a 1914 translation of the Ignatian Rules that St. Ignatius was not a scholar. He worked very hard to explicitly explain what he was feeling. And that's why his words may seem a little awkward to us.
Yes, and he wasn't a scholar. And actually, even as an adult, he went back to school. He was in school with little kids. Because the church was like, well, you don't have a degree, we can't ordain you, you can't preach, you're not supposed to be teaching, what kind of education do you have? So he had to go back and get that education later in life. So realize, we're reading the translation of a document that's over 500 years old. So that also is going to be a shift and a change for us. So that's part of the issue with the language. But part of the issue with the language is not so much the language as the world the language is opening us up to. That we have, a God-given ability to be open to, but that openness, that ability has somewhat atrophied in us because we don't see sacramentally as we were formed to see, as we're capable to see.
Yeah.
Yes.
These three levels make it really come alive for me. In my experience, and echoing what this gentleman said, I'm a firm believer on one-on-one personal counseling with a pastor. And recently I've had the privilege to counsel with a psychologist that I'm becoming aware of, I have this physical, but I also have deeper psychological issues, whether they be, things I'm not even aware of, things from my past, things from my thoughts, and everything gets all tangled up, and now I'm a convert, so now I have a whole bunch of mess up, So what speaks to me, what's valuable, and I have to discern that for myself, and you're absolutely
Yes.
right. Besides the personal counseling, I've also been on 3-day retreats, Curcio, in places where you're away from the world, and you can really think about who am I? Who am I to God? Who is God to me? And but these 3 levels, this has helped me so much just since I started taking this course to recognize, oh my goodness, I have this outer layer. I have an inner layer, but I have a more personal soul.
And we've lost sight of seeing ourselves this way and experiencing ourselves this way. This is from the Institute for Priestly Formation. This is what seminarians across the United States are being given for themselves, because they do a summer program for, usually about 140 seminarians from across the United States for a 10-week program in spirituality at Creighton University in the summers. I used to teach out there. That's how I'm familiar with it. And this is what they're being given for their own spiritual lives, but then also, should they be called to the priesthood and ordained as spiritual fathers, to share with their spiritual sons and daughters. So again, there's hope. There's hope. But even among priests, in priestly formation, this was somewhat lost. And ways of taking this language and applying it to our experience had to be found. Not only to update the language, but also to address it to an audience that wasn't raised to be formed to see themselves this way, which is different than Ignatius was dealing with. People were formed to see themselves more this way. I mean, they wouldn't have had this, they wouldn't have this language, but it would have made more sense to them than it does to us. All right, next rule number 7. Does anybody have a copy of the rules themselves? Not the notes, but the rules themselves, to read rule 7 for us. Go for it. Yeah, that's the one, yes.
The 7th, let him who is in desolation consider how the Lord has left him in his trials, in his natural powers, in order to resist the different agitations and temptations of the enemy, since he can with divine help, which always remains to him, though he does not clearly perceive it, because the Lord has taken from him his great fervor, great love, and intense grace, leaving him, however, grace enough for eternal salvation.
All right, that's the end of it, right? Okay. Again, don't freak out about the language. That's why we're here to kind of break it down a little bit. Very simply, what this rule is saying to us is that the person who is in spiritual desolation should consider God's perspective. Consider God's perspective. This rule encourages us to think, to seek thought that can strengthen our resolve to struggle out of the desolation. My ability to live this rule will be impacted by my understanding of God, by my experience of God. If I think, well, God is this harsh judge, this kind of mean person who's looking to try and trip me up, that's going to impact my thinking about looking at God's perspective. But is that part of the principle and foundation? Is that Ignatius' view of God from which flow the rules? No. What is Ignatius' view of God? That God created me for a relationship, and that ultimately he wants to see me meet the goal of that, which is to be with him forever in heaven. So the rules are flowing out of an understanding that God is someone who is trying to help me get to him. important for me to keep that in mind in my living of this rule, considering God's perspective. I have been allowed to enter into some kind of a trial through which I must work with my natural gifts and powers. Let me see, there's a...
Kind of like he's teaching you how to fish instead of doing it for you.
Exactly. Very good. Yeah, very, very good. I'm trying to see the Lord has taken from him his great fervor, great love, and intense grace, leaving him, however, grace enough for eternal salvation. That's important. Grace enough for eternal salvation. So he's not going to allow anything to happen, he doesn't want anything to happen that's going to cut that relationship off, but somehow he's leaving me to my own powers to strengthen me for the journey. To strengthen me for the journey. So, that means if he has allowed me, remember, God gives us spiritual consolation. He doesn't give us desolation, he allows it. He allows it to happen. If he allows it, then there is meaning in it. There is purpose to the trial. It's not meaningless. So there is a value to desolation. There's a value to it. It doesn't necessarily mean I've done something wrong, and it doesn't mean I'm being punished. There's a value to it in some way if I'm considering God's perspective. Why is God allowing this? If he's allowing it, there must be something good in it for me. So this rule gives me hope that this experience of desolation is not worthless. God gives us an opportunity to resist the desolation. And resist it we can. Resist it we can. I have my own powers with which to march on. God is allowing me this desolation. He must think I can respond to it. He thinks enough of me to say, this kid's got it, he can do it. Yes?
Could you use the word test in this particular role? Like, I'm being tested? Is it?
The only thing I would say is it's not so much, I don't know that it's so much the test as the lesson. Does that make sense? Like, I'm more comfortable with the word lesson. I'm here to learn something. So I can't take the test until I learn it, It's more a lesson than a test, I would say. But it just in applying those words, I would feel more, by my own experience, it's not so much a test as a lesson. Yes, sir.
You say Jesus was in desolation in the 20 days in the desert.
I guess you could apply that. Certainly, for example, he was weakened at that point. The scripture says was he didn't fast for 40 days, and what was the first thing that the evil one tested him? Tempted him. First goes into bread, you're hungry, eat. And he had to have of his strength. That's not my mission. That's a good thing, but it's not my mission. So you could in an analogous sort of way apply that. Yes.
Would that also describe the Teresa that she went through the 40 years?
Yes, I would say yes. Yes. And again, was there a purpose to that? How can you live with that if you don't have some hope that the Lord is using this for a purpose? And very much, the purpose was not just in that particular situation, of Mother Teresa, it was not just for herself, but her being a vehicle for others. Because herself was so diminished in there that God's joy was what was shining through so directly for others. Yes?
When we were talking, it made me also realize that when other people that you're close to are going through desolation, you can also learn from their desolation. I mean, you can see their experience and how they handle it, and you can spare, I think, yourself sometimes from going through some of these things.
Oh, absolutely. And again, we don't follow the Lord alone. We follow the Lord together. So again, the sharing of this, I think, is, to have people that we can talk to about this and share this with is very important, because I can learn something from someone else, for sure. Absolutely. I'm not here I don't have to figure it out all on my own. Yes?
You said that God gives you the power with this desolation of coming closer to Him. But if you don't know, does he let you know what the power is so that you are?
Well, oftentimes that's part of the lesson. That's part of the lesson. I'm allowed to struggle so that I can figure out, well, I can do something, I have stuff I can do on my own that maybe I didn't even realize. So sometimes that can be the lesson, learning exactly what kind of gifts I can bring, and what kind of strength I have that I didn't realize before.
Well, I wonder if you think of something that can bring you closer to Him, but then what you're thinking is not what God wants you to do, or the power that He's giving you so that you can change.
Rephrase the question for me, I'm missing the question.
Well, if He gives you that you're supposed to try to figure out what to do to get closer to Him. I mean, but what you're thinking is good and right, but it isn't. So what?
Well, and again, that's where we have to discern. If I'm trying, then I haven't learned the lesson. What I've experienced, if I'm in desolation, I'm going to stay in that desolation until I get the lesson right. And if I'm not getting it right, I'm not getting out of the desolation. As soon as I figure out, oh, like, for example, when I said to you just before about the horrible thing happening, and I looked at the rules, and I said, oh, that's what's happening. Boom, the desolation was gone. But it wasn't until I figured it out, what the lesson is, and got it right. So that's precisely but then, the next time I went through a similar desolation, oh, I knew then. That arrow was in my quiver, right? It was right there, I had it at my hand.
Now, if you finally got the right,
To get out of the desolation, yes.
desolation, does God give you, say, oh, I mean, in a way, I mean, in thinking or whatever it is, that this is what that you've gotten out of the
Yes.
desolation into the country?
Absolutely, yes. And that can be part of the lesson. That can be part of the lesson. Why is He allowing this? It could be, and we'll see later, it could be because He's trying to teach me, the strength that I already have within me that I'm not even aware of.
Was Teresa in desolation for 40 years?
Yes, but probably more than that. I mean, that was probably more an extraordinary experience of the dark night of the soul, which has overlaps to desolation, but is much more intense there. So yes.
I think I would have to be very careful who I read. I wouldn't want to say that I was like Teresa. No.
Well, we're not like Teresa, but we're not like, most of us are not like Teresa of Avila either. We're not like in spiritual, mystical ecstasy floating into the air. I mean, maybe that happens to you, but it hasn't happened to me yet. But we can taste of it. If we're really opening ourselves to this, first we all have the capacity for that, if God calls us to it. If God calls us to it, but we can all taste of it. And it's good to know even just the taste. And that taste allows me to see that no matter how much I've experienced, there's always so much more. No matter how deep I feel the Lord has brought me on the spiritual life, it can always get deeper. It can always get deeper. Yes?
Do all priests required to go through this class?
Say that again?
Are all priests, do they get to go through or required to go through this in training? I can't
No.
imagine it. No?
I would say no. I mean, it would depend on the seminary, and certainly, like even this is taught throughout through the Institute for Priestly Formation, which is not a seminary. It's dioceses that choose to send their seminarians to that program. So that the access is there, but it's not necessarily it's not necessarily part of the curriculum. When I was on the faculty of the college, actually this course I originally put together as an elective at the college seminary for seminarians. The original course was put together as a semester course as an elective, but again they weren't required to take it. It was an elective.
Jesuits do though, right?
Oh yeah. Well, so this is Ignatian. I mean, this is their parish. This is their parish. Yes.
In an overall, I'm just curious that this is being brought forth because is it because there's bigger picture society that our society is in desolation and we're looking to maybe, find a.
I would say part of this is, I think, why are we suddenly so often talking about the, St. Ignatius and the rules of the discernment of spirits, whereas, 30, 40 years ago we didn't do that. I would say part of it really is the fruit of the Second Vatican Council. And the Council's call to religious communities to restore their roots, their original charisms, and really strengthen those charisms. Because even the rules of the discernment of spirits among Jesuits was not necessarily their focus for a good chunk of time. It had kind of gotten somewhat lost. I was reading an article the other day online about something that was stated recently at when the Jesuits elected their superior general, whatever he's called, and they were making some statements about Ignatius and who Ignatius is, and this was an older Jesuit, and he was very happy with the way that they were talking about Ignatius, but they were talking about Ignatius the spiritual man, Ignatius the mystic, Ignatius the man of the rules for discernment. When he was in formation as a young priest, that's not the Ignatius he met. The Ignatius he met was the soldier, was the one who was battling for Christ. And it was a very different, both true, but emphasizing different aspects of the man, which then, because he's the founder of their community, emphasizes the character and culture of the community. So there has been a sense in religious communities, let's go back to our origin, what was the original intentions of our founder, and so that, not just for themselves, but the church called them to that to enrich the entire church. So the Jesuits themselves have rediscovered in new ways the rules of the discernment of spirits and the spiritual exercises, and suddenly you see people, for so long, regular people weren't taking the spiritual exercises. Jesuits were taking the spiritual exercises. But now there's just a resurgence in that, and I think that's part of the fruit of the Council. And the Council's call to religious communities to really bring the best of their charism, the roots of their charism to the whole church. Yes?
I have a question that I've never known the answer to this. Hope maybe you can help me out with this. My experience has been, for some reason, there are certain people who want to know, there are others who have to know, and I don't understand why so many people don't have the drive for spiritual connection or a pursuit of God. I don't understand that. Why some people and the rest not?
Well, I would say
everybody here has to have it. You wouldn't be here. I'm talking about everybody else.
Again, it speaks to our contemporary culture in that we've lost sight of who we are as human persons. If we lose sight of God, if God is lost, who is the creator, we've lost sight of something within ourselves. And so therefore we tend to limit ourselves. We limit our capacities. If what you see is all there is, well, that says something very different about who I am as a human being. That affects my philosophical anthropology, the way I understand myself, the way I understand human beings, the way I understand man. If all you see is all there is, also affects epistemology. It affects my understanding. It affects what I think knowledge is, and what knowledge is capable of. If reason is all there is, human reason, and human scientific knowledge is all there is, well, then there's no sense of, there's no openness to mystery. There's no openness to wonder and awe beyond. And even scientists, that's going to bite them in the rear end at some point, because to be a scientist is to be open to truth, to be open to wonder, to be open to trying to search for things unknown, which needs to have some sense of mystery there. So again, contemporary society has limited the human experience far more than it should be. And these things are opening us up to a deeper sense of reality. And they're dramatic precisely because they're so contrary. They're so countercultural to what's out there today.
I was just going to say that it seems like our society settles for, like it's the fast food society. We're so shallow. Everybody's so
Yes.
shallow. Everybody's content with being shallow.
And that's the extreme result of what you see is what you get. It's only the surface. There's nothing deeper. Yes.
So to that end, what he was saying, that we are an intelligent people.
Yes.
We are an intelligent people. And I've heard so many people say, so when I die, I guess I just died. They're willing to accept that? Why? Why wouldn't your natural intelligence take you deeper?
A lot of it has to do with early formation. Early, I'm talking childhood. What's not happening is children are not being taught spirituality, that they even have a soul.
What you're being open to is huge, and recognize it's a gift. Ignatius is God's gift to us through Ignatius in these rules are huge. They really are. They're huge. They're great gifts. They're gifts. They will be gifts for you on your own personal journey, but there will also be gifts that God, once you really become ingrained in them, as we grow in holiness, again, what's happening to us? The world and the evil one is trying to shrink this, is trying to, get this to be as superficial as possible, for these two inner ones to be small, 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 small. What is the saint? What does the heart of a saint look like? This one is pushed out all the way over to here. That's the heart of a saint. Whose heart is shining through there, but that part of my own heart, where that place in me where the Spirit and I. That's the heart of a saint. By making us more superficial, they're trying to make us this. This is the heart of a saint. And that's what this can open us up to. So if I'm in desolation, one of the things I need to do is consider God's perspective. That God is a good God. That God desires that I move towards Him in holiness and be with Him forever. So if He's allowing desolation, there's a lesson in it for me. There's something good in this for me. And if He's allowed me in this desolation, He knows I can respond to it. That at some point I'm going to get it. And He leads me to my own designs, but making sure that my soul is not, the ultimate goal is not disrupted. He gives me enough grace to keep connected to Him. But this gives me hope that I can respond productively to this desolation. Rule 8. Someone read Rule 8 for me, please. Go for it.
Let him who is in desolation labor to be impatient, which is contrary to the vexations which come to him. Let him think that he will soon be consoled, employing against the desolation the devices as is said in the 6th rule.
All right. If you're in the key virtue for desolation, patience. Patience. Also one in our fast-track society that which we're not very good at, right? Okay, patience. When we're in desolation, very often the regular response is, if I'm in danger, it's something is to flee. Get me out of here. Ignatius says, no. Wait. Be patient in desolation. Don't flee. Endure the desolation. Stay in the desolation. Carry the burden faithfully. Be patient. Again, it's important that this speaks to thoughts, not feelings. This speaks to thoughts. I need to force myself in my own thoughts, push myself in my own thoughts to be patient, even if I'm feeling, because the feelings, when I'm in desolation, I'm agitated, I'm anxious, I'm restless. Those aren't patient feelings. But I'm not controlled by my feelings. I have intelligence. and I can say, you know what, I am going to sit